Hello, freedom fighters! Welcome to another episode of the Angry Albertan podcast. We have a really exciting show for you tonight. I never thought I'd be this excited to talk to a lawyer, but here we are. These are strange times indeed. Tonight, our guest is the second in command at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. These are the guys and gals that have been fighting relentlessly in the courts, keeping these governments on track and trying to do their best to get them to honor the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we were endowed with. And we got all sorts of things to talk about. We're going to talk about the litigation they're doing, you know, how quickly they managed to get that government of Manitoba to step back. We want to educate you viewers on your rights, and I know I'm going to learn some things from this too, and how to stand up for those rights, how to, if we're going to get a ticket, how to do it properly so we don't get ticketed with something that's going to stick. I want to cover all of these bases today, and so without any further ado, I'm going to bring Jay Cameron on the program. Thank you for being here, Jay. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Joshua. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. This is wonderful. I mean, it's in this day and age, you might as well be a superhero. I mean, you don't have to wear a cape anymore. Now you just need a suit, maybe a robe.
My wife is probably laughing in the other room at that. She didn't think I'm a superhero, but thanks. We do what we can over here.
Oh, well, you guys have just taken the Alberta government to court, and I know there's some of those things that you have to keep a little close to your chest right now, but would you mind telling the folks at home about your latest legal action against the Alberta government?
Sure. So the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, of course, is based in Alberta, and so we're most familiar with the Public Health Act in Alberta and what's transpiring in Alberta. And so, if you go back in time to March 17 and the declaration of a public health emergency, things started to get weird fast, and they've sort of just continued on that trajectory. And things opened up for a while, of course, in the summer, and then in the fall, we started to hear rumors about new lockdowns and new measures that were coming, and now, of course, we're back basically on very, very severe lockdowns where no gyms are going to be open after this weekend, and bars, restaurants, no in-person dining. So I mean, things are quite severe all of a sudden. And so the Justice Center has been preparing litigation against a variety of provinces for many months, actually. But it takes a long time to prepare litigation possible. You could just go ahead and slap it together and file it, but it's a lot of work that goes into it. So I know people have said, well, what's the holdup? But the holdup is that we're doing it properly and in a considered fashion. And so we've obtained experts, and we've studied the data, we've examined the law, we've put the materials together, and so one after another, we are launching litigation in a number of provinces. And this new one is against the Alberta government. We filed Friday, and we've teamed up with Rath & Company, which is a Calgary law firm. And really, even though litigation is complex, really I can boil it down to a few simple things. We live in a free and democratic society, or we're supposed to. And the Constitution gives legislative power to Parliament or to the provincial legislatures. It doesn't give any power to individuals. And the reason why power is given to democratically elected institutions is to protect people, so that they have a say in their governance, in the people who make laws on their behalf. That's what democracy is. And so the apportionment of power to these institutions is a very important thing. And then we all get together. I don't know how many people you have on your call right now, but we all get together and we have a vote. It's called an election, and government comes into power, and then they make laws after study and after debate, and those laws are binding on millions and millions of people in the province of Alberta. And that whole system has been short-circuited by the COVID pandemic in a couple of different ways. And for the purposes of this piece of litigation, one of the big things that we're going after is the bestowal of unilateral authority on the Chief Medical Officer of Health. There's nothing democratic about what's happening in Alberta right now. If you've looked at any of the public health orders, they all begin with the same words. I, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, do hereby order. Well, what is it about Dr. Hinshaw that makes her this powerhouse to pass laws in the province of Alberta that can affect the lives of millions of people? Is that constitutional? And the Justice Centre's perspective on that is a resounding no. And the reason is because none of what's taking place regarding these health orders is being run through the legislature. Your elected representatives are not voting on anything that's in the orders. They're not studying it. They're not debating it. There's no public consultation. You have, for lack of a better word, and I don't want to be inflammatory here, Joshua, but for lack of a better word, what you have is a health dictatorship. It's essentially tyranny. And regardless of whether or not the Premier says, well, this is Dr. Hinshaw and she's the one making the orders, and Dr. Hinshaw says, well, the Premier and Cabinet, they make the ultimate decision, I just make recommendations. The bottom line is that her name is on the order, and it's her power under Section 29 of the Public Health Act, according to what they're saying, that gives her the power to make these kinds of laws that affect millions and millions of people. And so it is kind of an overturning of the last election, because everybody got together, they elected representatives. Those guys and gals are supposed to sit in the legislature and make decisions on behalf of for their constituents, for the good of their constituents. And it's important, I think, to recognize that, despite the fact that I'm sure that it's a very difficult job dealing with COVID-19 and being the Chief Medical Officer of Health, the fact is that the Chief Medical Officer of Health is a doctor. I don't think that she's got a whole ton of clinical experience. The bottom line is she's got no experience running a province. The reason why we have a legislature is so that we can have a group of people make decisions for a bigger group of people with respect to running the province. And that's not happening right now. And so our perspective is that the orders are unconstitutional. They are a bestowal of enormous power on one person who, regardless of whether you're in favor of what's happened or not, I think we can all agree that what has happened over the course of the last 9 months, there's nothing democratic about it. It's unilateral rule. And so that is one of the big things in the litigation. And then, of course, we're representing a couple of churches. We're representing some small businesses in various provinces in the litigation that's commencing in Alberta and in other provinces. And with respect to the churches, they have been told you can't open beyond a certain capacity. You have to do certain things. You have to wear masks during services. You can't sing. In some provinces, they're saying you can't have an indoor service at all. In Manitoba, they said you can't even have a drive-in service, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later. But it's just extraordinary measures which have been imposed on the populace, and this is at a time when the lockdowns have wreaked havoc, not just on Canada and the jobs that have been lost in Canada, the businesses that have been closed and will never open again, but globally. There was an Oxfam report that came out, and 350 million jobs around the globe have been lost not because of the virus, but because of the government's response to the virus, because of the interruption of supply chains, because of the cancellation of tourism and trade, because of the interruptions of agriculture and the loss of workers and all of these types of things that go into the making of the modern society. And these countries where they've locked down, they don't have CERB. They don't have AAA credit rating where they can raise money. These countries are facing famine and war, civil war, and war with other nations. And it is all because of the mismanagement on a global scale of the response with respect to COVID-19. But you look at Canada, and obviously you have a lot of people who are suffering. There's a lot of people who have lost their jobs. And what they want to do is work. They don't want to be on CERB. They don't want universal basic income. They don't want a handout from the government so they can live hand to mouth for the rest of their lives. What they want to do is be independent people who can provide for their families, who can earn a living, and who can retire. That's the dream, and that's what the Constitution, from our perspective, is intended to protect. And so these people, they're suffering tremendously. Suicides are way up. Drug and alcoholism is way up. Domestic violence is way up. You have depression that's way up. I was talking to a lady, and she was telling me that that the people who her pastor are counseling, 50% of them are young people who are in a state of just terrible depression because society is locked down, schools are shut, they don't have social outlets, and they're looking at their future and they're saying, what future do I have in this world where the government has everything locked down? And so from the church's perspective, the churches are saying, look, we fulfill an important role in a pluralistic and free and democratic society. And the Supreme Court of Canada has talked about the importance of churches and the role that they play. But these churches, in some places in the country, they're not even allowed to be open. In Alberta, they're at 15% capacity now. And you have pastors who are saying, we have all of these people who are out of work. They're depressed, they're suicidal, they're on drugs and alcohol. We want to help them. We want to do counseling. We want to have fellowship. And the government is saying, no, you can't. And so obviously that's a very significant violation of Section 2A of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't know how familiar your audience is with the Charter, but just very briefly, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects your right of conscience and religion under Section 2A, your right to freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, and a free press under Section 2B. 2C is freedom of peaceful assembly, which mirrors the language very closely in the Second Amendment in the First Amendment of the United States, which is the right to freedom of assembly, and then freedom of association, Section 2D. And so I just want to back up just a little bit. With respect to churches, obviously locking down churches and preventing them from doing basic church things like having church, having fellowship lunches, having song service and things like that. These are very significant infringements, not just of Section 2A, but also of 2B, which is freedom of expression, and also freedom of assembly. And just a word on freedom of assembly, just because it's more and more, it's an increasingly important right. The right to freedom, peaceful assembly in the United States came about through the founder of Pennsylvania, actually. His name was William Penn. And approximately 350 years ago, he was a Quaker, which is a religious denomination. And he was preaching to a group of Quakers, and the British didn't like it. And so they had William Penn arrested, and he was charged, and they had a trial. It was a jury trial. And the jury found William Penn not guilty. And the court, which was run by the British, was so infuriated, they threw not only William Penn, who had been declared not guilty, but they threw all the jurists in jail too. And so the freedom of assembly comes out of this history, directly out of freedom of peaceful assembly, comes out of this history. And it's incredibly important because, a lot of the rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms are individual rights, but the right to assembly, is a right that you cannot exercise with one person, right? To assemble is by nature the gathering of other people. And so very incredibly important right, both to churches and to people, small groups, family gatherings, Bible studies in their houses, and the right to protest. Because, again, going back to the U.S. Constitution, one of the reasons why you have a right to freedom of assembly is for seek the redress of public grievances. And so your ability to assemble and inform the government of the damage that it is doing to society is a key right. It is part of the democratic imperatives. If the government can lock you down in your house and tell you, you don't like it, and we're going to ticket you if you assemble, then they're overthrowing democracy, and that's what's happening in Canada from coast to coast. They have overridden democratic imperatives in a host of ways, and then to add insult to injury, after they've cost people their livelihoods, cost them their freedom, cost them their mobility rights, cost them their ability to get the health care that they pay for, right? Everybody pays $7,500 a year to get health care. People can't even access it because, well, we have to preserve capacity, right, for potential COVID victims, right? So we've canceled all these elective surgeries. Like, the lockdowns have destroyed society, and to add insult to injury, the government says you cannot assemble. You cannot assemble to seek redress for public grievances. If you come to complain at the legislature, or if you go to Olympic Plaza in Calgary and you try to talk some sense into the fat cat mayor of Calgary, that what you're doing is hurting us as the populace, you get a ticket for that, and you're told to go home and stay in place and to keep your mouth shut. And so, from start to finish, what is occurring in Canada is very scary. It is happening at lightning speed, and people are bewildered by it. Lots of people are still terrorized by the media about COVID being an especially deadly killer, which we know it's not. The data shows that it is not, and I'll get into that a little bit. But the fact is that people are bewildered at the speed at which this has happened, and Canadians are they tend to be a very polite people. And so, they deal very patiently with the tyranny of the establishment, but they're suffering. And, and so one of the reasons why the Justice Center has filed this litigation is to reestablish a line in the sand with the government, right? Because right now there's no line in the sand. You have three branches of government, Joshua, right? You have the legislature, and they make laws. You have the cabinet, the executive, right? And they implement laws. And then you have the third branch of the government, which is the judiciary. And they're all supposed to keep each other in check, right? But right now, the legislature is not weighing in on what's happening with these health orders. So the people's representatives are they're in limbo, right? They're in suspended animation while the health orders wreak havoc on society and destroy businesses and people's lives. But the legislature is not able to weigh in, right? Because Dr. Hinshaw is not accountable to the legislature, right? And you can't vote Dr. Hinshaw out. And so the litigation is to establish a line in the sand. And what we're hoping is that the judiciary, and what we believe is that the judiciary will establish a line, a demarcation, and say, the government is okay up to this point, but past this point, they're way out of line. And that is the judiciary's job. That is the whole reason why it exists, is to keep government in check. And it is far past time that this matter was in front of a court, and it's far past time that the legislature took back control of what's going on in society and began to have debates, comprehensive debates, and analysis and public feedback, and that we restore democracy in this country. Because right now, this place is on the fast track to totalitarianism and authoritarianism, and it's the judiciary's job to stop it. So that's the reason for the litigation.
Well, that was a heck of an opening statement. I give that an 8 out of 10. It would have been 10 if it was just a little bit more inflammatory.
I'm watching my P's and Q's.
Well, you are speaking to the angry Albertan. I kind of lean more towards the inflammatory. So now I am not a charter expert by any stretch of the imagination, but our charter does have a built-in portion that allows the government to take away rights and freedoms as they see fit if they're deemed reasonable in a free and democratic society. What bar do they have to set to prove that this is a reasonable action in a free and democratic society?
Yeah, so, you've heard academics say, well, the government can basically do whatever it wants as long as they can justify it. That's academics, to be honest with you, and the academic world is a cesspool of totalitarian thought these days. But the reality on the ground is that the judiciary looks at Section 1 of the Charter, and it's meant to be a narrow exception. You look at the language of Section 1 of the Charter. It says that the Charter guarantees these rights. And I'm going to pull the language up here for you so that I can read it. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it. Okay, so that it says it guarantees the rights and freedoms. That's important, right? Because guarantee is very strong language. Subject only, so this is the exception, to such reasonable limits prescribed by law. Okay, now this is incredibly important, right? Prescribed by law, as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So what does that mean? Now, again, the academics and some totalitarian government figures will tell you that they can do whatever they want as long as they can make an excuse to the court to justify it. That's not what this means. It means that the starting point for fundamental rights and freedoms in a free and democratic society is a guarantee that your rights will not be infringed, absent extraordinary exception. And so when it says prescribed by law, well, what is law? In Canada, law is, first and foremost, a process by which the legislature meets in a democratic session on behalf of people after public consultation, after amendment, after debate, right? And passes a law, right? And it becomes codified, it becomes posted, the people know what it is and the government know what it is, right? And the reason why you have this thing called the rule of law, very important thing. The rule of law is there so that people know what their rights are and so that government knows what their restrictions are, right? And so, there's a whole bunch of requirements with respect to the rule of law. The posting of laws in a place that is conspicuous and that people can get to it. Not conspicuous, but that it's readily accessible to the public so that they can read and see what it says. And so, the question is, from our perspective, first and foremost, is whether or not these public health orders have the force of law at all, because they haven't been subjected to legislative scrutiny. Right? They are unilaterally implemented. They are arbitrary. They are irrational in a lot of ways. In Manitoba, you can't have church. The government up until a couple days ago said you can't have church even if you're having church in a parking lot while you sit in your car with the windows up and listen to the sermon on the radio. You still can't do that. Okay? Now, what sense does that make when you can go to Walmart and sit in the parking lot with hundreds of other people with the windows up and listen to music on the radio, right? There's no risk of transmission. The virus doesn't go through glass and steel, right? And so that's a totally arbitrary and frankly cruel and tyrannical, oppressive provision that was created by the Manitoba government. And also other governments mirrored that. Ontario did that. Saskatchewan did that. Alberta did that at the beginning of this, and they changed after letters, after warnings and things like that. But, another example of arbitrariness is the fact that, in the spring, you could play golf in Saskatchewan, but you couldn't play golf in Alberta. Well, why not? Same virus, right? You're outdoors. You can have some restrictions, you can have some safeties, but no, golf was outlawed in the province of Alberta. Well, why? Again, because there's no rational reason for it. Because one person said there's no golf allowed in Alberta, right? Now, irrespective of the golf courses that wanted to open, and irrespective of the people who needed the break from the pandemic to go outside and play golf, they couldn't do it, right? I'll give you another example. If you come into the country from travel and you land in Saskatchewan, you go home to self-isolate for 14 days. If you want to leave your house to walk your dog outside, you can. All right, as long as you're by yourself. In Alberta, you can't do that. Why? No, there's no good reason. It is the rule of authoritarian people who have not subjected the proposed laws to the legislature, and they're doing whatever they want, and that's the danger. I somewhere in that long scree there, I forgot what your question was. So bring me back here, Joshua.
Well, what would the bar be to prove? But I think you answered it. If they want to overrun the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it needs to be done through the legislative process. I think that was the answer, right?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. And then there's this whole court scrutiny process. It's got to be justified in a free and democratic society, and that's the other thing. I mean, Canada is a free and democratic society. Right now, we have no democracy, right? And we have no freedom. And so are these public health orders that have been issued around the country, which are prohibiting the exercise of what is termed in the Charter a fundamental right and freedom, are those justifiable? Are they a justifiable limitation? And Chief Justice Joyal, over the weekend, this past weekend, he raised doubt over whether or not a person could lawfully be ticketed for the exercise of their fundamental freedoms. And we're not talking about little tickets here. It's not $15. We're talking $1,200, $2,000, $4,000. There's provisions in Alberta which, this really, in an act of true insanity, the legislature changed the fine, the potential fine, from $100 and $500 for a breach of a public health order to $100,000 and $500,000. Truly an abuse of the civilian population. But I digress. But the Justice Joyal said, I have some doubts about whether or not, for example, you're a healthy person, you want to go to church. You're a healthy person, you want to have your family over for Thanksgiving. You get a knock on the door, and you get a $1,200 ticket because your sister comes over with her kids to have Thanksgiving dinner. Is that a lawful ticket? And the court in Manitoba, this is the Chief Justice, raised the doubt as to whether or not you could lawfully ticket somebody like that for the exercise of what are called your fundamental freedoms in this country. And if I'll just pause for a moment there and say, the ticketing and the restrictions on healthy people are unprecedented. We know that 99.7%, now these are stats that the media is not going to tell you, right? Because the media will tell you that there's all these cases, right? Scary cases, right? That's what the media tells you. What you don't hear much in the media, and what you don't hear on CTV and Global and CBC, while they're scaring the populace with cases, is the fact that 99.7% of people who get COVID recover from it. If you are a young person under the age of 20, you have a greater chance of being struck by lightning and killed than dying from COVID. And that raises the question about why the schools are shut. Schools in a lot of different places around the world are back open again, but in lots of places in Canada, they're shut, right? Even though the risk to young people is almost nothing. It's almost nothing. I'll give you another stat here. This one is in the statement of claim, and this one comes courtesy of Jeff Rath. I'm going to give him credit for it. Statement of the originating application, is on our website. This is paragraph 8 of our originating application. The mere existence of COVID-19 in Alberta does not constitute an emergency. For Albertans under the age of 60 years, the chances of dying of COVID-19 in Alberta are currently 1 in 210,000, while the murder rate in Calgary is 6.1 per 100,000. Put another way, a Calgarian under the age of 60 is 12 times more likely to be murdered than to die of COVID-19. Okay, just let that sink in.
Yeah.
This is what society has been shut down over. All right. Now, I just want to pause here because I think this is incredibly, this is an incredibly important point. We have universal health care in Canada. And it has become a sort of sacred cow, right? And whenever you hear a public service announcement in these provinces, including in Alberta, you hear talk about how it's necessary to preserve capacity, which is why we're locking down, okay? And you start to think about that, all right? There's real people who need real health services, but they can't access them. And there are real people out in society who are suicidal and depressed and on drugs and alcohol because of the lockdown. Not like as a related thing, but directly because of the lockdown. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their businesses, they've been locked in the house with their families, and people can't go outside. They've been ticketed for sitting on park benches, $1,200 tickets, $1,200 for shooting hoops in the park by yourself. That was Ottawa. These people are suffering. But on the other side of the equation, we have to preserve capacity. That sounds very robotic and inhumane. And it reminds me of this scene in the movie I, Robot. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a movie with Will Smith. It's based on a book by Isaac Asimov. And it's a famous sci-fi story. And in the story, they have these robots in society who are supposed to be the servants of the people. And they help people do all sorts of things, and they're stronger than people, and they're faster than people, but they are the servants of the people until something bad happens in society, and the robots lock the humans down. And they say, it's safer for you to stay inside today. It's safer for you not to drive. It's safer for you not to go out, right? We're protecting you. Well, that's what the health system is like in Alberta and in lots of other places. It's saying, well, we're taking away your ability to go to the gym because it's safer for you. We're taking away your ability to go to church because we say it's safer for you. We have to protect capacity. And this capacity is empty beds that aren't being filled. In fact, they weren't filled in the spring when Neil Ferguson said that there was going to be a worldwide apocalypse because of COVID-19. That never materialized, right? So you saved capacity, but destroyed everybody's lives. Congratulations, right? You're stupid. And then you get the scenario here where, this is the justification. This is the justification. Right? And in the meantime, you're destroying society, right? And I mean, the premier even said this. We're not going to lock down our way out of this. We're not going to police our way out of it. But here we are locking down out of it again, because the hysterics in the media, and the hysterical academics, and the hysterical people in government, the hysterical mayors of the cities, and so now we're all locked down again. But you cannot. He was right. Right? He was right the first time. He's wrong now, but he was right the first time that you cannot lock down. You cannot police your way out of this. And so, the health system is supposed to be the servant of the people, but all of a sudden it's become our jailers, right? You have $7,500 that you pay into, every single person pays into the health system every year, all taxpayers. But if you want to use it, our office is inundated with people who go to the clinic, and the clinic won't see them because they're not wearing a mask. 76-year-old man, he's like, I've got emphysema, and they're like, no, you can't come in because you're not wearing a mask. I have an aunt in Oregon, and she goes once a month to get a shot in her eye. Right, she's 94 years old, and the doctor says, well, we're not going to give you your shot because you're not wearing a mask. And she's like, well, I'll sign a waiver. Lives by herself, right? She says, I'll sign a waiver if you'll give me my shot because I'm claustrophobic and I can't wear the mask, right? And it affects my breathing. And the doctor's like, well, no, the mask is not for your protection. It's for my protection, right? So, today you can't get your shot unless you put your mask on. And so that's sort of the rationale. I could sit here and tell you horror story after horror story. People who have been screamed at, they have an actual bona fide disability, whether mental or physical. It's protected under the Human Rights Act, but they go into Walmart or they go into their gym and people start screaming at them, right? And it's just unbelievable. It's sad what's happening to society.
I've got customers that I've had 2 this week that won't even let me into their homes because I'm mask exempt. I show up on the door. They get several emails from me with my COVID-19 policy that explains that I'm mask exempt and encourages them to maintain their social distancing if it's a concern for them. And then, of course, nobody reads anything. And and then I show up at the door, waste my time and gas to get there, and basically I'm just told, just sent on my way. And this fear-mongering, I mean, yeah, we can blame the media all they want, but the fear-mongering is coming from these professionals. It's coming from our premier. It's coming from Dr. Hinshaw. It's coming from Alberta Health Services. I couldn't believe it. I watched a little bit of Jason Kenney's live stream Q&A today, and he admitted that we are running that PCR test at 41 cycles of amplification, which is guaranteed to produce way, way beyond 50% false positive rates. You know, and this is what we're destroying society for. And it's like, yeah, hospitalizations are up. ICU numbers are up. But you know what? This is flu season. And I don't believe that the flu has been eradicated. I don't believe that the flu has gone anywhere. I think the only thing they're looking for is COVID, and they're just labeling everything as COVID. And you know what? We haven't even reached the peak of flu season. So Kenny could lock us all down and weld us in our homes, Wuhan, China style, and the numbers are still going to continue to rise because it is flu season. You know, it's complete lunacy what they're doing. And I mean, just last week, Jason Kenney's on his program going on and on about how we haven't seen a single case of transmission from a hair salon. We haven't seen a single case of transmission in a casino. Restaurants and bars only account for 1% of the community spread. And yet here we are less than a week later, and he's basically given Rachel Notley everything she asked for and demanded it. And I guess Kenny's hands were tied in a way because, like you say, he's basically handed dictatorial control over to Dr. Hinshaw. Because as far as I understand, when you go into a public health emergency, Dr. Hinshaw could basically come up with any edict that she wants. I mean, she could make us all walk backwards tomorrow if she felt it would save us from COVID-19. You know, like, it's just, when is this good? Like, is there even an end in sight? And I'm so happy to hear about this Chief Justice in Manitoba speaking out against this, because I worry about the courts. Because to me, it's every time you see a picture of a judge in the news, they're wearing their mask. I mean, the Chief Justice of Alberta here was making masks out of her old robes and auctioning them off for charity, raised like just about $100,000 or $200,000 for charity. Made out of making masks out of her old robes. I mean, who would want to wear that on their face? I mean, like,
I can't comment about that, Joshua. Of course, our matter is in front of the courts, so it wouldn't be safe.
No, but I'm glad to hear that some of them are, you know, that they haven't completely drank the Kool-Aid, and I hope they come to their senses, because this is just absolutely insane what's happening. I mean, you look at what's happening in Calgary. Art Pulaski has been ticketed. He's received a stack of tickets a week apart for his activities on the weekend. I mean, it's bad enough that Nenshi's trying to ban him from feeding the homeless and just being a Christian in general. You know, but, Ryan Audette's getting tickets for the Walk for Freedom. Hester Art's brother. Luckily, I haven't gotten any tickets in Edmonton, but, you know, when we mentioned the $100,000 potential fine that Jason Kenney put into place, when I started protesting in April, that was the first thing on my mind, especially when I started organizing protests myself. It was like I could be up for $100,000 fine. You know, and actually there was an organizer, a young guy in his 20s, that organized the Liberal gun ban rally protest at the legislature. He got a phone call from the sheriff's office before that event, was ordered to cancel it, and they threatened him directly with $100,000 fines. You know, and then that rally went on regardless. Dave Bjorkman put it on, and that's where Cody Haller and the couple of gentlemen that you guys represented got the I think probably the first social distancing tickets handed out in the province, and possibly the last.
Maybe.
Except for the guys in Calgary, although. And the tickets for masking, you have to wear a mask outside in Calgary, apparently, because it's a public premise includes the outdoors. You know, like.
Yeah, It's out of control. And like I said, just to go back to the role of the judiciary, there has to be a line, right? You have a constitution for moments like this in history. That's why you have it. And so there has to be a line. Like you said, where is the line? If there's total unilateral power, where is that line where this is how far the government can come, but no farther? And so, this is how the common law is built. Courts have an opportunity to apply the Constitution and the Public Health Act in a situation that has never occurred before. It's our perspective that, and our client's perspective, that things are way out of control. And you look around the world. Russia, they have winter, they have flu season. Russia is open. The gyms are open, the theaters are open, the restaurants are open. And there are lots and lots of places around the world that are open, where flights are flying, where hotels are full, where people are eating at restaurants. And that's not unusual in these countries. What's unusual is Canada. That's the reality.
Oh yeah, Kenny keeps claiming that our lockdown is still much lighter than what you're seeing in places like Australia. And it's like, so as long as there's one dictatorship that's worse than ours, then we're in good shape, according to Kenny. That's just fantastic. So from what I'm hearing on this end of the conversation here is that getting tickets is an important part of this process, because that is the vehicle that you will use to get the courts working on it. So
absolutely.
What advice, because, people are asking me all the time, hey, are you worried about this weekend? Because last week there was new restrictions put in place, and everybody says, oh, are we going to get tickets this week? And I just look at the legislature and I scream in my speeches, come and get me, Kenny. Come and get me. And what's the right way to get ticketed? I've noticed a lot of people like Rudy Bruce went into a gas station to get a water jug. Obviously we didn't see the beginning of the video, but he ended up having the police called on him, and he was charged with trespassing. We're seeing this a lot. They're not even going to hit you with the COVID-19 rules and guidelines. They're going to hit you with trespassing, because you've been asked to leave by the store. How do we avoid these types of situations and make your job easier and more effective?
Sure. So just a word about getting a ticket in general. It is important for people to exercise their fundamental rights and freedoms. If you don't exercise them, you lose them. That's just the bottom line. It's like lying in bed for a month and not walking and not doing anything. You're going to lose your ability to move, right? Your muscles will atrophy. Well, your constitutional rights will atrophy if you don't use them. And so Section 52(1) of the Constitution Act 1982 says that that the Constitution is the supreme law in Canada. Now, notice it doesn't say that the public health orders are the supreme law in Canada, right? You have a fundamental right to gather, to practice your religion, to express, to assemble, to associate. These are fundamental freedoms. They are part of the supreme law in Canada. And so, you need to exercise those fundamental freedoms. Now, if you do it in a peaceful way, right? But if you don't exercise them, and you don't tell the government that this is a free and democratic society, and this is the law that we are acting in accordance with, then those laws disappear. If you're ticketed, there's going to be a test as to whether or not the government can ticket you, a healthy person, minding your own business, doing what the law says you have a fundamental right to do. And fundamental means foundational in a free and democratic society, whether or not it's justifiable for the government to charge you $1,200, $5,000, whatever it is, the insane amount, for you as a healthy person doing what the Constitution says you have a right to do. And so, Joshua, I'm not to advocate civil disobedience, rather to advocate civil obedience to the Constitution. If 100,000 people get tickets tomorrow for assembling at the legislature to protest what is happening to society, what will happen? The factual answer is that not a thing will happen, because you cannot give 100,000 people a ticket and then have them all plead not guilty in a court of law, and I mean, it would destroy the system. And so ultimately, a government is supposed to be the servant of the people, not the other way around. But people have been cowed into fear, scared of the virus, and they're just dawning to an awareness that it is not as dangerous as they were told, and that the restrictions are a disproportionate, unfair, cruel, and abusive restriction on the exercise of their normal rights, their fundamental rights. Look at the restriction on singing, even in places where that are open, 15%, right, of fire code capacity. They're saying you can't sing, and it's Christmas time, and so there are religious people, whether you're religious or you're not. I mean, it's Christmas time. Is it based on sound science that if you sing, that there's going to be a catastrophe? I mean, we know, like I said, going back to the statistics, 99.7% of people who get COVID recover from it. And so if you get it, it is not a death sentence. The vast majority of people have no symptoms or mild symptoms. And so there's this document called the Great Barrington Declaration. You probably heard of it. 45,000 doctors signed this declaration, and it says it advocates for targeted safeguards to protect the most vulnerable and allowing the rest of society to continue to function, because the rest of society is not at risk. The people who are dying from COVID are not the healthy 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds in society. They're not. The average age of death from COVID is 83 years of age. The average age of death in Alberta is 82, which means that people are dying right around the range where they were going to die anyway. And if you look at the graph of deaths, and I wish I had these statistics to put up. I'm not as technologically savvy as I ought to be, probably. But if you look at the graphs of deaths for this year and compare them with the graphs of deaths for the last 5 years, you'll see that there was a spike in the spring of deaths that was above the average. But the age of death, the number of deaths for Alberta has fallen far below the average for this time of year. And so what the graph is saying is that people who probably would have died later in the year died earlier in the year, right? But you look at the statistics for deaths, for the data for deaths, pardon me, because I mean there's lies, damn lies in statistics, right, as we know. You look at the data regarding deaths for Canada and the United States. This is not an abnormally high death year. It's not. It's right about the average for the last 5 years. But we're destroying society with lockdowns, and overthrowing the rule of law and overthrowing the Constitution. It's a sad state of affairs. I'm a former prosecutor. I used to run bail hearings. I used to work with the police. And you asked me about how to get a ticket in a proper fashion for exercising your civil rights. The answer is that you should be polite, that you should not be inflammatory, that insofar as possible be at peace with the police. If I can cobble that together. If you're given a ticket or if you're arrested, take your ticket, say thank you very much, and exercise your right to be not guilty until proven innocent. Plead not guilty to the ticket. Make the state jump through the hurdles of proving that you have committed an infraction that justifies this fine in the light of the Constitution, and that means filing a constitutional challenge. If 1 million people get tickets for exercising their peaceful right to assembly and then plead not guilty, there's going to be 1 million tickets that go to prosecutors across the country. And the prosecutor is going to look at those tickets and weigh them against the Constitution and the fact that people were peacefully protesting the lockdowns, which are destroying their lives and the lives of their family. I mean, don't you have a right? Don't you have a right in a free society to say, look, you're destroying my child's future? You know, she can't go to school, she can't socialize with her friends. You know, even though there's no risk, there's no demonstrable risk to kids of this age. You know, don't parents have a right to express that to the government? Don't business owners have that right? Don't religious people have that right? The Constitution says that they do. And so, you know, one of the main things that I hope that people take away from this talk is that Canada is a free and democratic society on paper. But if you don't act like it's a free and democratic society, you lose it. And it won't come back. It won't come back. Learned Hand, who was an eminent justice in the United States in 1949, in a book called The Spirit of Liberties, gave this quote. He said, "When the spirit of liberty dies in the hearts of men and women, the Constitution cannot save it. The Constitution cannot help it." And that's what he said, and it is the truth. And so what happens next in Canadian society is largely going to be determined by Canadians. And that's really the bottom line. And the courts.
That was an incredible quote. So now you can agree with me or disagree. I know you're an agent of the court, and you can't be as inflammatory as I can, but some let's quote unquote, I guess we can't call it safe, but the role of the JCCF is to stand between you and the government that is trying to trample your rights. You guys will not be very helpful between me and Costco, or me and Walmart, or me and the gas station, because the charter only applies between the government and the people. So things that would be like wise ways to obey the charter would be to hold church services, open your store if you're ordered to close, hold a protest rally, protest march, sing Christmas carols on White Avenue. Those types of activities would be activities where the JCCF could directly defend against those tickets. Whereas if a gas station orders you to leave the store because you're not wearing a mask, I don't know if the JCCF can really be that helpful in an instance like that, because number one, you're going to get charged with trespassing anyway because you've been asked to leave. Do I have that right? And I mean, is there any recourse? I guess obviously there's human rights complaints. If you can prove that you have a letter or that you are disabled or have a medical or mental concern that means you don't have to wear a mask, but you have to have the proof from an expert. If you're just an average guy off the street who says, I'm exempt, well, you could try pulling that at the store, but you are not going to have any luck with the Alberta Human Rights Commission. Am I understanding this correctly?
You said it perfectly. You can file a human rights complaint on the basis of a mental and physical disability, discrimination on those grounds, the protected grounds. You know, if you can't wear a mask and you have documentation to support that, then if a gas station throws you out, they're discriminating on the basis of your disability. And you have a case at the Human Rights Tribunal. And the Justice Center potentially would be interested in a case like that, although we're inundated with work at the moment. And so you could go to the Human Rights Tribunal, you can fill out the forms, you can make the complaint, but you're right. It's private property, and absent a human rights ground, there's not a whole lot that you can do. The Justice Center exists for people who have been ticketed, they've been subject to state action, they want to challenge a law of the state where there's direct friction between the constitutional rights of Canadians and the government.
And so now let's say you have a legitimate mask exemption and you go into a City of Edmonton recreational facility and you're asked to leave and you end up getting a ticket from that. That's going to be an easier case because, again, you're dealing with that level of government. When you're dealing with these corporations or sole proprietors, it's a crapshoot, and unless you can prove that case in the Alberta Human Rights Commission, which is going to require real expert, I guess the word would be testimony, to say that you are disabled or have a condition of some kind, you're kind of up the creek on that one. So it's very important that the people watching and listening to this, if you want to engage in civil disobedience, please be smart about it and make sure that the person who's going to be filing a complaint on you is basically a level of government. So we got to be out on public property, or like if you're a pastor and you want to hold a church service, I mean, no one's going to charge you with trespassing, because it's your church. So if we use our heads about this, I think we could make a real dent. And I mean, our protests every weekend, we try to get as much of civil disobedience in there as we can, or civil obedience towards the charter. I mean, we gather, we sing the anthem. Sometimes we sing other songs. Oftentimes, I encourage people to shake hands and introduce each other to their neighbor. Like if they were seriously watching our protests. Which I think they are, but I think they're afraid to come out at us because, I mean, like the amount of money that they could put in their coffers by ticketing us at these protests would be in the millions of dollars, but it's not happening. So, like, I don't know. I mean, which is good because I don't really want the hassle. I bring my kids out there and everything, but on one hand, we kind of need these tickets. Let's get this show on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best way that this can be resolved is for the government to look at the suffering of the people and wake up to the fact that what they are doing to society is far more destructive than the virus. The real virus in Canada right now is not COVID-19, it's authoritarianism. It's a suspension of the constitutional rights that protect this place, and that our forefathers fought and died to preserve. To have a silent takeover like this and a collapse of civil liberties is it's incredibly sad and distressing for a great many people. Yeah,
me included. Well, I said I would keep you for an hour, and this has been a record-breaking live stream podcast for me. We got 350 people watching live, which will translate into tens of thousands of views after the fact. Since we've got all these people here, is there anything else that you would really like to drive home before we call it a night?
Yeah. What I would say to you, and I can't see any of you tonight. I've never met you. I don't know who you are. I don't know how much you're suffering. I don't know what your personal circumstances are. But there was a point in time in the not too distant past where people realized that there were worse things than dying. People didn't come to the New World to have safety. They came to have liberty. They came to have freedom. That is why this place is a draw. You can have everything that you want in China, all the money that you want. You can have nice cars, you can have a nice house, but you don't have freedom. And that's why people in China still want to come over here and live here. And we have to wake up to the fact we have lived in peace and prosperity so long. We have to wake up to the fact that if we do not be free people for ourselves to start, and maybe COVID is not the issue for you. Maybe you're listening to me talking and you're thinking to yourself, well, this is nothing. But I can tell you right now that society starts to slide and it can get ugly real fast. In the same country that you're living in, the police can get a telewarrant in Quebec, they can kick your door in, and they can isolate you in a secret isolation facility. There's red zones and checkpoints, and this is the same country that you live in. And so the slide starts, and where does it end? We don't know. And so if today is not the day that you think, well, I don't have anything to stand for here, I'm going to go along and I'm going to get along, that's up to you personally. But the point has to come for each of us where we decide that there are principles that we are not going to go beyond, and that there are worse things than dying. Safety is not the only thing worth having in life. That's not life. That's basically what I have to say. Thanks a lot for listening tonight.
Jay, you've been a phenomenal guest, and one of the things I meant to mention to the audience earlier on is you folks watching out there, eventually I am going to get my ticket, and it could be $100,000 ticket. And if you don't want to see me lose my house and my kids go hungry, we need to support the JCCF because I have a feeling that when my ticket does come, that Jay and his people over there, they've got a heck of a team. You can go to the jccf.ca. You can see all their smiling faces, read their bios. I've been reading Jonathan Carpe's articles in the media for years and always enjoyed them. So these guys have been around for a long time. They are heavily involved and they are committed to fighting back this tyranny. And there's been a lot of groups that have shown up on the scene all of a sudden that are asking for your money. And they have no track record. You go to their websites, you're not even going to see anybody's name attached to these websites. Nobody's putting their names out there. Well, Jay Cameron is here representing the JCCF. James Kitchen represented the JCCF a few weeks ago at our rally in Edmonton. And Jonathan Carpe, the president of the organization, has been present for the last couple of weeks at the Calgary Walk for Freedom. So these guys have proven that they are committed to this cause. So if you are going to donate money anywhere to fight this COVID-19 tyranny, you should start at the www.jccf.ca. And the link to donate is in the description for this video. I would really encourage everybody, even if it's only $5, $10, or if you got lots of money, donate $1,000. But these guys, they're trying to hire more lawyers. They want to take on more cases. And if we're successful at picking up these tickets, they're going to have more work to do. And it's important that we support them. So if anybody out there has a couple of bucks, and I know money is tight for everybody these days, but this is a critically important cause. So if you're thinking of donating to anything COVID-19 defense related, this is the place where your money is probably going to be the most well spent at the moment. And so please go to the jccf.ca and send a couple of bucks their way. And if if we generate a lot of money off of this podcast for them, Jay might come on and talk to us again.
I'm always willing to come back.
Oh, Jay, well, this has been a fantastic show. I know I learned a few things. I learned a few things reading your press releases on the JCCF website. Everybody should bookmark that website. The articles that come out of there are amazing. You know, I was out screaming through a bullhorn back in April and May, and then all of a sudden, I was seeing all the things that I was screaming about come out in Jonathan Carpe's articles, and it was like, yes, finally, someone important is saying the things that I was saying, because I'm a nobody. I'm a total nobody. I accept that, but I have, whatever. I'm here now. So, but it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Jay. If you ever want to come on and share anything else with my audience again, I would sure appreciate it. You are welcome here anytime, sir.
Thanks so much, Joshua. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Jay. And now I'm just going to take this opportunity to plug the protest. Let me turn that music down a little bit. That's exciting. Oh, my goodness. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Tried to add music to the show. Spice it up a little bit. So, the Stand for Truth protest. Saturday, December 12th. That's this Saturday. Speeches start at 1:30. We march at 2:30, 3 o'clock, somewhere in there. Bring the family, bring the dog. Please leave your group signs at home. We're not looking to advertise other groups. We don't care who your favorite YouTube guru is. We don't even care about the angry Albertan at these protests. We are there to stand up for our charter rights and freedoms, and maybe we'll get some tickets. So one of these days, I want to see 1,000 of you out there. We had probably 400 last weekend. Every weekend's been getting bigger. I want to see 1,000. I want to have to rent a bigger PA. That's the kind of problem I want to have. If I got to go rent a bigger PA, and if I have to rope one of you guys into bringing a generator, let's do it. We're not going to take this new normal lying down. I want to see you guys out there. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Always a pleasure to do these podcasts, and so exciting with a guest like Jay and the JCCF. So thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Have a great night.